Hi, and welcome to this very special Impetus interview. Today we are joined by Dr. Sofie Burgos-Thorsen, a sociologist and industrial PhD at Aalborg University, but is also one of the co-founders and members of the Urban Belong Project, which was a citizen science initiative that hoped to map out the lived experience of those living in Copenhagen. The project was also the winner of the 2023 EU Prize for Citizen Science in the category of diversity and collaboration. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sofie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So just to begin with, I suppose, could you describe a little bit the rationale behind the Urban Belong project and the story of its development?
Yeah, certainly. So the idea behind the Urban Belonging Project, to keep it the most simple, was that we saw a need in this kind of collective of researchers and planners who are behind the project for producing more nuanced insights about how the city works as a space of belonging, not just from the kind of professional eyes of researchers or planners, but from the lived experience of those that live in the city. And especially we saw a need for kind of elevating more marginalized voices and kind of underrepresented groups that do not so often get heard when we are investigating urban issues or trying to kind of plan for the future. So this really goes both kind of for the research side of things and for the kind of industrial, practical reality of architects and urban planners and policymakers and so on, that tends to be, more and more focus on creating socially inclusive, mixed, equitable cities. But in our efforts to do so, we still lack a lot of insights about how does the city actually work for different people, and how do different people from different marginalized communities experience kind of barriers or enablers in the urban environment to feeling a part of the city.
So that's really interesting. So it seems that it was sort of an online tool to get these academics, these urban planners, these decision makers on the same page as those that are experiencing the living experience of the city, I suppose. And they were all part of the development of an interactive map, which allows, I don't know, kind of a, a real perspective, like a real time kind of perspective, I suppose.
Yeah, not necessarily real time. I mean, we had a very kind of prolonged process in which we took time to carefully kind of collect these different data points. So we had a very kind of thoughtful process that was designed to really give ownership to the marginalized groups that we engaged. So we had 7 different communities that were part of our project. And these included people that identify as deaf and people that have physical disabilities or function variations, mentally vulnerable people, people that identify as LGBTQ+, and internationals that don't speak Danish, and we had homeless people, and finally we had kind of ethnic minorities in Denmark, that being. So the project really engaged so many different groups, and the point was to also try to kind of break with tokenization trends and so on, and really engage, multiple people from all these different communities and bring them all together in dialogue about the city. And so we did that through these kind of photo voice exercises where participants were invited to go around the city and document via photography the spaces that either give a positive or negative experience of belonging for them. And then we also used these kind of workshops where we did participatory map making exercises, either more digitally or analog, and kind of held also different workshops where we would work together to interpret these different data points. So it was really a very kind of careful process where the point was to indeed take time and allow for the participants to be the ones driving the process, to decide which questions were even important to raise, and to also be the ones to work with interpreting the data. So in that sense, you can say that what we've come up with and what we've been able to compile into these composite maps and so on is a really layered mapping of lived experiences in the city that deal with many different kind of issues of urban nature, issues of accessibility, issues of place identity, and so on, and tries to unpack the complexity of those questions and what they mean to these different groups and the many different people within these different groups.
That's yeah, it's so good to hear that. Yeah, bringing so many people to the table and having these perspectives that are sometimes mm, overlooked by kind of town planners and that sort of thing. It reminds me a little bit of a story in the UK where to kind of reduce kind of road accidents and that sort of thing, they took away a lot of the road markers and a lot of the ways like things that usually govern how the roads work. And they found that it did reduce kind of like incidents with cars, it but it was almost inaccessible for anyone with like uh visually impairment or deaf communities because there was no way to cross the roads. It was kind of a bit of a free for all for it did
Mhm.
reduce kind of like car speeds, but and for the regular pedestrians it was good, but it kind of just didn't really take into account the additional needs of others, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a very good example. And I think it points to kind of the importance of some of the ideas that this project builds on. So we're, of course, informed by kind of very many important researchers and kind of activists that work in the kind of space of justice. So we have Satya Costanza Schock, who's been writing about design justice, and we have Catherine D'Ignacio and Lauren Klein from MIT who have been writing about data feminism, and these different kind of perspectives they raise questions about exactly what you just brought up. These kind of issues of, well, arriving at the best design solutions or the most kind of inclusive and equitable design solutions just simply demands that we have many different voices at the table, and especially the more kind of marginalized and minoritized groups that might have accessibility issues or kind of other infrastructural issues to being a part of the city. So bringing kind of the right people to the table definitely matters in terms of imagining more diverse needs and more diverse kind of solutions for such kind of issues as the one you're mentioning.
It was also very interesting to hear that obviously such a project feed like citizens feed into the data collection, but it was also fascinating to hear that you had the citizen groups working alongside the town planners and scholars. You were working with people from Copenhagen and Amsterdam to develop these questions and to develop what kind of data that you were looking for to feed into this project and the databases, I suppose. Could you talk a little bit about how, yeah, the co-disciplinary kind of approach that was?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really important part of the project. So we already in the kind of early stages of the project, we wanted to really make sure that we didn't just, kind of project our own interests as researchers onto this project, but that we kind of really situated the project in the needs and the kind of issues that are important to the communities that we wanted to, involve and kind of essentially work for. And then also that we situated the project in the um, kind of professional reality of urban planners and architects and the policymakers in Copenhagen that we want to, change things and to actually design differently. So it was really important to bring both of these groups together, kind of the kind of civic society kind of aspect, and then the groups of planners and policymakers. So really early on, we did kind of stakeholder interviews with different representatives of NGOs that represent the communities we wanted to work with. So we had LGBT Denmark, Danish Deaf Association, Danish Disability Association, and all these different groups. We had the kind of representative from these organizations meet us and help discuss, what should the project do? What should the aims and kind of objectives of the project even be? And how could we design something that actually would be inclusive to their communities? And then at the same time, we also had interviews with the city architect of Copenhagen and with different kind of professionals that work in the space of citizen engagement and urban planning to kind of try to address, well, where are actually the shortcomings as it is experienced right now when we want to engage citizens and kind of let citizen voices help shape urban planning. Where are kind of the barriers or the struggles right now? And then we really kind of tailored the tools and the methods that we developed to be indeed addressing these kind of insights that we were given. So an example, for instance, was that engaging these community representatives in interviews, we learned that they were super excited to be part of a project and get the kind of opportunity to map, their barriers to inclusion in the city and so on. But they were actually even more excited to be able to map all the kind of aspects of the city that does feel like belonging to them. And so they said that, or multiple representatives from these groups said that, very often there's kind of a tokenized approach when the city wants to engage them, and they are often kind of only being called in to tell their trauma stories of whenever the city is excluding them. And of course, it's just as important to be able to point to all the places in the city that do feel inclusive or that does give a sense of identity or belonging or something like that. So for instance, that quickly reframed the project in our mind and made us give as much attention to identifying kind of the positive stories and the dimensions of belonging and experiences of belonging that are shared by these participants, and not kind of just take this tokenized lens and see only the kind of negative stories as important. So this is of course an important example of why it matters to early on invite the kind of stakeholders into the process and really let them also tell us what is important to do.
No, that's such an yeah, most of the time when people might think of projects like this, your mind instantly goes to places that aren't accessible or aren't kind of friendly to these communities. But I suppose these people are living their daily lives, and there must be like positive aspects to their daily lives that, yeah, do need to be focused on. Perhaps lessons can be learned not just from the pitfalls, but also from the areas that work positively for these communities.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think that what we learned is that there's so many particular kind of placemaking practices that you find among kind of these different groups and these different communities for whom the city is maybe not always designed to be for them, but yet they find so many kind of very active placemaking practices that they invent themselves and they cultivate as a community to kind of take ownership over a space or find ways of still working with a certain urban environment or feeling at home in an environment, even though there are still barriers to entering it. And so I think it's super important that urban planners and architects and researchers learn from that kind of knowledge and that kind of placemaking practice, which is super resilient, super creative, and kind of also really geared towards building community. And that's something that we generally want to cultivate in our cities, not just for marginalized groups, but kind of for the city at large, right? We want to cultivate resilient communities, and this is really something we can learn from these different groups.
I suppose the ultimate aim is you don't want to create, I don't want to say the word ghettoized, but the term comes to my brain, like areas that are designed for, let's say, the blind community that are separate from the rest of the community. You want kind of the populace to be able to experience the urban environment as a whole, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that going into kind of these issues of accessibility in particular, the general learning is of course also that the kind of particular programming or design interventions that would make a space more inclusive to particular groups also would work for everybody else. So what we learn is of course that that I don't think that you would ever make a space that would only be serving, let's say the deaf community or something. If a space is inclusive to people with a sight impairment or kind of like a vision impairment or another kind of physical disability, function variation, even mental kind of vulnerabilities and stuff like that, designing spaces that are good for people with such kind of barriers or accessibility needs, it's good for everyone, and so there's really not a downside to kind of implementing that in the way that we design urban spaces.
I suppose it's kind of this idea of equity and that a rising tide raises all boats a little bit. I don't know if that's a little bit too much of an Englishism, but
yeah, it might be. I'm not familiar, but I get the gist of it.
You talk a little bit about engaging with these communities. Could you describe how, like, of course, a big part of your project would have been going out and building kind of connections within within these aspects of society. Could you talk about how you encouraged them to A, submit kind of information and how that was done, and B, yeah, kind of was this done via an app or was it done on an online platform or?
Yeah, that was a really big kind of issue to also take up in our project, was to revisit, the very kind of practical tools that we have at hand. And we wanted to make an impact beyond our own project, and kind of use, our project as a vehicle to invent new tools or test new application of tools that then other engagement projects can kind of learn from. So we did two things. One is that we tested a tool that is made by a Finnish company called Maptionary, and it's basically an online kind of platform in which you can do participatory GIS and mapping exercises. So that is something that we tested out in the project, and we kind of gathered our participants in workshops to really try to train them on how to think through maps and how to think through kind of spatial dimensions of the issues that they wanted to bring to the table. So we of course couldn't just like expect everyone to be able to sit down and immediately do mapping, but we had kind of workshops where we talked about how these tools work, and then helped everybody in the room sit and basically fill out this kind of digital spatial survey. So there would be different questions that would prompt reflections or prompt them to document certain experiences, and then they would reply to those questions by drawing maps, basically. So we did that, and then we had multiple rounds of workshops to then kind of interpret those maps together and maybe go from the more individual maps that all the participants had drawn on their own to then kind of bringing them together in a more kind of collective mapping exercise where we discussed, layering different information on top of each other on the same map, and kind of discussing in between different participants, why are they seeing the city in a certain way, or how are their perspectives or experiences either the same or different, and so on. So that was kind of one stream. And then another stream of kind of data collection and tool making was that we wanted to do photo voice. So this is something that many kind of urban planners and researchers have used before to engage participants in taking photos of the city. But the issue is that there's not really very many good tools for this, especially not very structured ones. So oftentimes researchers depend on, WhatsApp or email or something, and having their participants kind of take photos on their phone and then send them via these third-party platforms in which you can't actually control data privacy, and you can't really protect the data, and you also tend to collect it in not so structured ways. So what we did was that we actually, through the project, developed our own app, which is open source. So the idea is that cities and other NGOs or researchers can use it to do similar things. So this is called the Urban Belonging app, and it's open source on GitHub, and it basically enables project managers to set up a project, and then you can invite participants that then go out and collect kind of photo voice data in response to a particular prompt that you give them, and then they will collect through this app kind of more structured and geolocated photos that we can then work with later in workshops and so on. And have a more kind of have more information associated with the photos. We can ask participants to annotate the photos while they're collecting them. So we already kind of collect a lot more nuanced information, and but still have this kind of fun way of engaging participants, because they are going on walks in the city and are actually like out there capturing things, and maybe in that process also reflecting a little bit more on their relationship with the city. So we saw that just simply produced really wonderful outputs, both in terms of the photos and the data, but also how the process was experienced by the participants. So they all said that it was really fun and really engaging to do this kind of data collection, as opposed to like the surveys that they're used to maybe doing. And using maps and using photos, we found in these workshops, was a really engaging way of bringing everyone together around the table and making kind of collective exercises around, looking at something on a map or on photos and discussing, what do we all see here, and why is this important, or why is this something we feel good about or bad about or whatnot. So using these kind of visual tools really, I think, restructured the engagement process from feeling kind of dry and maybe boring and maybe also a little bit intransparent. Then suddenly it became much more clear and evident for everyone what we were talking about, because people have kind of an experience already with looking at photos and looking at maps. So suddenly kind of working with data, it became less kind of scary or taxing, and was actually something that we could engage everyone in our project to do. Yeah, and this, just to build on this kind of photo voice tool that we made, the point was, of course, also with submitting to this kind of citizen science prize and so on, it was, of course, that we hope to create something that can empower more people to do citizen engagement in this kind of empowering way that gives voice to more people and makes it easier for different communities to show how they see and experience things. And we've been really kind of excited to see already that this particular app and tool has been already used by different architects and planners, different cities, kind of city governments, different NGOs and different researchers. So really kind of targeting all these different potential users that we hoped would take it up. And we're definitely seeing that, the attention that we got from winning the award and the kind of prize that came with it was helpful in continuing to tweak the tool. So we've used some of the prize money to kind of continue to develop the tool and fix some of the little bugs and issues that maybe prevented it from being more useful. So we've kind of continued to develop on it and document it with articles and thorough kind of GitHub explanations and stuff like that, and are collaborating with a lot of interesting projects that are using it now, either setting up their own version of the app or kind of using our version. So that's super cool to see.
Yeah, it's so exciting to hear that you've been able to use it. You're not just coming up with a report of written you've coming up with almost kind of like a living document of, a storytelling kind of way of people to share their experiences, combining kind of like this online map with pictures, with annotations, and these communities can share their stories and have a platform that they can kind of, share these experiences in such a visual way that, is far less dry than reading a written report about the assessment of these areas, I suppose. So that's really fascinating to hear.
Yeah, it's super useful also because the kind of visual component of the project, of course, lends itself very well to also communicating in public exhibitions, which is what we've done. So we've held 3 exhibitions now, 2 in Copenhagen, and 1 at Ars Electronica. And so it's of course super helpful also to be able to, or super important to be able to bring these insights and these stories that these communities are submitting and contributing, to actually give them, the prominence that they deserve and bring them to the public, both a general public, but also specifically to kind of designers, policymakers, and so on, and kind of confront some of these professions with these insights to actually kind of inspire change, right?
And it just gives a fuller picture of the issue, I suppose, or the positives, I suppose. I should probably not say issues like full stop, but the aspects of the cities that are that are worthy of highlight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there was also a sense of pride and transparency that we wanted to create for participants. So it's a issue with a lot of kind of conventional citizen engagement processes, is that the citizens are only involved in kind of data collection, and then they are pushed out again, and then they don't really see where their data is going or what it's being used for. They don't necessarily know, which political agendas something is being used to serve. And there's definitely been kind of documented problems of policymakers and planners just kind of cherry picking in the data and and extracting from it whatever they need to confirm some solutions that already are, planned before the process even starts. And so I think there was also a sense of transparency that we wanted to create here for the participants, and to show other professionals that you can design a process in which the communities have this much ownership, and which they also see, what comes out of it. They are actually a part of seeing these exhibitions, and what goes into them is a direct reflection of what has been highlighted by the participants and what they have chosen to give attention to in these workshops and so on. So it's also super important to kind of rebuild trust with these communities and show them that these sorts of processes, they don't just have to be extractive and kind of intransparent and serving, hidden political agendas. They can actually also be about really truly giving a platform and a voice to different stories and different needs, and being then true to those stories all the way through in these exhibitions and so on. So I know that out of all of our participants, I think half of them came to several of these exhibitions and saw their own kind of stories hanging up there, saw their portraits also on the wall, and kind of really saw the DNA of their presence in the exhibition. So it's also kind of seeing that resonance is also really important.
I suppose this runs up to my next question, I suppose. Could you talk a little bit about any kind of examples of how the data has been used to influence decision-making or urban planning, using the data from the Urban Belong project, I suppose?
Yeah, so there's kind of 3 different levels, you can say, of impact that the project has had in kind of more tangible ways. And so the first one is that in the project, we had several partners that were industrial actors. So one of them is Gale Architects, this kind of Danish urban planning company that has a global operation. And at the time, I was working for Gale and doing this project from kind of within this company. And so one kind of tangible output is that the insights from this project has been used to kind of create new design principles and new kind of design practices within such a company, right? And that does not necessarily result in immediate changes in Copenhagen here and now, but it is something that is carried through in all the different kind of projects and that the company is doing, and basically amounts to new design practices and new design principles that are informed by these insights. Then we've done kind of presentations and dissemination and sharing of the project with the city architect of Copenhagen and kind of the whole municipality group that sits and works with kind of city planning. And we haven't had a kind of client relationship with them, because this has been basically an independent research project. So there hasn't been like an immediate intervention that has resulted from the project, because that's not how the project was set up. But it has kind of brought these new insights to the city architect and informed kind of policies and future interventions and especially around, okay, the next time that we are actually doing an urban renewal project or something, how can we think about involving which communities? So that's kind of on the level of process a little bit more, that we've kind of been able to maybe change the practices of how the city thinks about this. We've already seen in Aarhus, which is another Danish city, that they've started to use this particular method to engage local communities in an urban renewal project. So it's already kind of starting to sink into the actual practices of how the cities work with, inviting citizens in. And then there's kind of the wider community of researchers and NGOs and so on around the world, where we've seen already, I think, 6 different projects just in the last year use these methods and use this particular tool and so on to do citizen engagement. And that ranges from Seattle to different countries in Africa, and to a project in Italy, and projects in the Gulf region. And so there's really been projects all around the world and with different kind of stakeholders involved that have started to use these methods. So that's kind of the impact that we've seen so far which goes kind of more on these like design principles and design methodologies, and then kind of citizen engagement practices.
No, it's really exciting to see the Urban Belong project kind of building momentum and building kind of these connections and sharing your experiences and your technologies with these other municipalities, other cities, other regions around the world. And yeah, developing kind of their own bespoke version of what their needs, what they need from a project similar to yours, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully, I mean, the experience so far is that many times I think cities can feel like this kind of citizen engagement is just a process that they have to kind of tick off and say that, okay, yes, we did it, and we had an obligation to do so. But now with the way that we're trying to kind of reconfigure this, and bring new, fresh, and exciting methods to the table, it actually feels like more than just a mandatory thing to do, but something that the cities actually benefit from. And I think there's more and more attention around the world to understanding that doing citizen engagement, it's not only about kind of, well, obligation to do so, and then an idea that maybe you get insights that you can use to make better decisions. It is also a really important step in building trust with certain communities and building or creating like a buy-in from those communities. So if you're really doing a thorough process where the communities that are invited feel that they are being heard, then there's also going to be more of a buy-in into the solutions, and the communities will take a more active role, you know, on a civic level in kind of helping take care of a neighborhood or helping take care of an intervention that is going to take place, whether it's kind of maintenance of parks or you know, kind of social infrastructures or whatnot. Engaging people in this way is a really important resource for cities to actually kind of solve some of these issues. They can't just be solved, you know, top down. We also need to engage communities in helping to kind of provide care and so on for the spaces that we are talking about.
It's really fascinating to hear more and the great work that you've done with the project. And related to that is the Urban Belong project being the winners of the 2023 Diversity and Community Awards for the the EU Prize for Citizen Science. I just wanted to ask a little, what was that experience like? How was it like to be recognized on such an international level, and has it impacted the project at all?
Yeah, it has for sure impacted the project. I mean, we were already kind of quite far and really finished with the project itself in its first stages. But of course, the winning the award has been super important in terms of being able to apply for new funding and to take the project into kind of new directions and to build on it. I think specifically the prize money has been helpful in terms of, as I've already kind of touched upon, being able to continue to publish the tools and the methods that we use, and to document them and really make them more accessible, you know, to more kind of other actors out there. So we've made an app, but of course, making an app is not just and making it open source on GitHub does not mean that it's accessible, you know, to other people. So it's been really helpful to kind of continue to develop and tweak the app itself, and then also to kind of work on documenting. And we're working also on making little kind of explainer videos, for instance, that show, you know, in a very easily understandable way, how can you actually use this app. And I think the significance of the award is both that, well, more people are becoming oriented towards these methodologies and exposed to them, and maybe also see that they have been that this process, this method, these tools, that there's a substantial, you know, contribution there that really could help them do whatever they need to do in a new way that deals with some of these issues. So winning the prize has both been very kind of a concrete help in enabling financing of tweaks and dissemination and so on in a way that really makes this accessible to more people. But also, of course, is kind of certifying or validating for others that that these are methods that you could really help solve some of these issues.
That's, yeah, so interesting to hear. You've touched upon this a little bit, but as my last question, what comes next for the Urban Belong project? Either in the short term, do you have some events coming up in 2024, or in the long term? Yeah, what's next on the horizon for Urban Belong?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think we think of it as the as different phases. So Urban Belonging Project 1.0 has been kind of finished, and we have done a lot to celebrate that and exhibit that and publish about that. But then there's of course the next steps, and I think multiple things are in the works. One is writing a bigger publication, so that could be a book on belonging that tries to use this project as an engine to really try to discuss what does belonging in cities actually mean, and maybe collect other project examples as well. So that's one project, is kind of a book project. A second kind of avenue of further development is the app itself, this photo voice app that we've made in the project, which we are continuing to test in different applications. We are continuing to tweak it and to develop it with the different use cases that we see come in through different collaborators that use it. So there's also an avenue. And then I think the kind of third trajectory that this can take, at least for me, is kind of adding new methods onto this kind of toolkit. So we've seen the emergence of a lot of generative AI tools that are great at making images as well, and it can be used in a participatory way to invite participants to create visions of the future, either desirable or undesirable urban futures. And so I think there's a connection there with our methods also being inherently visual, and trying to kind of redo some of these kind of workshops and exercises, but testing how generative AI can be helpful or be a kind of a tool for allowing citizens to also negotiate the future. So that's kind of a next step, or a potential kind of research exploration that we are looking to build onto it.
I suppose, is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
No, I think we covered most of the things that are kind of important to mention in this kind of context. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure.